You feel, even without wanting to admit it, that something is deeply wrong with the way you're living. It's not drama, it's not fussiness, it's your soul trying to warn you that it can't pretend anymore. The people around you keep laughing, producing, posting, following scripts, but you realize that something inside you has broken. And no one has explained to you what to do when the world seems to keep going, but you can't keep up. Carl Jung already warned, there comes a point when the persona can no longer bear the weight of conscience. That's when spiritual fatigue appears out of nowhere, when energy disappears in the same conversations, when intuition starts screaming while the ego tries to silence everything. You begin to distance yourself. You begin to find your own reflection strange. You begin to feel an emptiness that is not depression. It's transition. And do you know what nobody tells you? This process is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that the soul has decided to take control. You are going through exactly what Jung called the clash between the true self and the self you invented to survive. That's why it hurts. That's why it's tiring. That's why you feel out of place, different, wrong. You're not wrong. You're awakening. And everything in you, body, shadow, mind, intuition, is trying to lead you to the place where you can finally stop acting. But before you understand where this path leads, you need to confront something even deeper. Why has your soul decided to grow weary right now? And what does that say about who you are becoming? Something inside the body starts to creak when the soul is tired of living on autopilot, as if every shallow space in the modern world provokes a nausea that can't be masked with a smile. The person tries to maintain the routine, tries to go with the flow, tries to pretend that nothing has changed, but the body doesn't negotiate with lies. It reacts, and it reacts badly. It's that exhaustion that appears out of nowhere, that feeling of, I no longer belong here, that spiritual fatigue that Carl Jung, in one way or another, already pointed out when he spoke of the distance between persona and shadow. Spirituality even tries to warn subtly, but when the ego insists on ignoring it, the body screams headache, irritation, heaviness in the chest, the desire to disappear for a few hours. The person even thinks it's stress, but it's not. It's the self pushing the door from the inside, showing that something that worked before has now become a prison. And the more she tries to fit into this shallow world, the more her body protests, as if to say, listen, because if you don't listen now, it will hurt more later. This social nausea is the first sign that ego collapse is beginning to take shape, even if the person is unaware of it. Everything that previously seemed acceptable, empty conversations, noisy places, people connected only superficially, becomes a trigger for an uncomfortable physical sensation. And there's no point in trying to rationalize it, because the body always gets there first. It perceives when the soul is asking for fresh air, asking for depth, asking for a life that makes sense. It's almost an existential allergy, an internal warning that something has broken spiritually. Carl Jung said that when individuation begins, everything that is not true causes pain, and that's exactly what happens here. That person who used to endure everything is now exhausted after 5 minutes of banal interaction. Trying to force socialization only makes it worse. Therefore, a powerful practical exercise is to start identifying exactly which environments drain energy and which restore presence. Writing this down in a notebook, for example, helps to see what the body already knows, but the mind insists on ignoring. When the body begins to reject the superficial world, a person perceives a kind of internal noise, as if it were impossible to continue living at the same volume as before. This doesn't mean antipathy, selfishness, or fussiness. It means a spiritual awakening happening in practice, displacing the old persona and showing the fracture between who you were and who you are becoming. It's common to feel tired upon waking, even after sleeping well, to feel anger when listening to shallow conversations, to feel a desire for silence even when surrounded by friends. The body is saying, I can no longer live on autopilot. And the more a person tries to ignore this request, the more the symptoms intensify. An experienced mentor would recommend adjusting 3 simple things at this stage: reducing artificial stimuli, especially screens, walking alone for 10 minutes a day to recalibrate the nervous system, and learning to say small no's to conserve energy. Each genuine micro-gesture facilitates what comes next, because what begins as physical tiredness soon reveals something much deeper, demanding expression. There comes a moment when the soul, after years of whispering in the depths of consciousness, finally decides to speak louder. And when it speaks, my friend, it's not with beautiful words or poetic messages, it speaks with discomfort. The person feels that silent tension in their chest, unsure if it's anxiety, a premonition, or just accumulated spiritual weariness. But something pulsates, saying, you can no longer live the old way. And the ego, accustomed to being in charge, trembles. Because the ego is terrified of this deep voice, this spirituality that comes from within and dismantles certainties. Carl Jung described this as the beginning of individuation, the moment when the self begins to pull the steering wheel of life. Even if the ego is clinging to it tooth and nail, the person feels an almost physical internal friction, an uncomfortable duality, as if caught between 2 invisible forces. The truth wanting to emerge and conditioning trying to keep everything the same. And each attempt to ignore that inner voice only makes everything louder and more urgent, as if the soul were tired of being a supporting character in a life that was never its own. This conflict between soul and ego is so intense that the person even thinks they are becoming confused, when in fact they are becoming aware. And this is where many people get stuck, because the inner calling doesn't match external expectations. The soul says, go this way, but the family says, don't do that. The soul says this relationship is over, but fear says, what if you're wrong? The soul says, you deserve depth, but the ego retorts, stay shallow, it's safer. And the person feels this battle in their body, sudden irritation, the urge to cry for no reason, that feeling that something inside is about to break. This almost breaking is the collapse of the ego trying to postpone the inevitable. To alleviate this, a powerful exercise is to write down what your intuition really wants, without editing, without judging, because when we put it on paper, the ego loses strength and the soul takes shape. This simple act brings clarity because it translates what spirituality has been trying to say for months. You have changed, but you are afraid to admit it. What's most striking is that when the soul decides to speak, it doesn't ask permission. It simply begins to rearrange life from within. Things that didn't bother you before now irritate you. People who once fit in now drain your energy. There's a natural repulsion to everything that is false, superficial, performative. It's as if the persona and shadow begin to fight for the same seat, and the ego in the middle desperately tries to maintain the old script. The person feels this waking up, walking, working, even washing dishes. It's as if something is constantly poking at them. And the more they try to return to the old version of themselves, the more discomfort they feel. It's not drama, it's spiritual awakening in its rawest form. Jung already said that nothing is more painful than becoming who you truly are. And this silent pain, this internal rupture, prepares the ground for what comes next, because when the soul speaks and the ego tries to silence it, something inevitably begins to crack. One day, without warning, a person realizes they can no longer maintain the persona they've worn their whole life. The old persona, that facade built to please, belong, or survive, begins to weigh like wet clothes on the body. Everything that once worked, the automatic smile, the habitual agreement, the rehearsed everything's fine, now provokes physical discomfort, almost emotional nausea. Carl Jung always warned that the persona is useful, but it was never meant to be a home. It's a mask, not an identity. And there comes a moment when the soul, exhausted from the charade, simply refuses to continue. The person tries to act as before, tries to respond as before, tries to fit in as before, but something no longer sticks. It seems that every artificial gesture freezes as if the body betrays the lie. And the most curious thing is that no one needs to say anything. They feel it themselves. It's a silent collapse of the ego, that point where you understand that what brought you this far won't take you any further, and pretending becomes literally impossible. The saturation of the persona occurs when living according to the expectations of others costs more than facing one's own truth. It's when you realize you're exhausted not by the world, but by playing a version of yourself that has already died inside. It's at this stage that subtle symptoms emerge. Unmotivated irritation, tears that come out of nowhere, that feeling of, I'm not that person anymore. And it's not an exaggeration, it's spirituality operating in depth, pulling the soul back from exile and forcing the ego to admit it has lost control. The persona malfunctions, the shadow knocks on the doors, and individuation begins to tear the ground beneath your feet. Real-life examples are common. The person who previously agreed with everything now remains silent. Who previously tolerated noisy environments now wants silence. Who previously sought approval now feels a strange repulsion for their own need to be loved. And this is frightening, of course, but at the same time liberating. Because this emotional collapse is the only path to the authentic reconstruction that is to come. There comes a point when life demands truth, and those who try to resist feel the price. A person experiences a kind of internal short circuit. The ego says, keep going, but the soul responds, it's no use, and the body always sides with the soul. It becomes harder to smile when you don't want to, harder to maintain empty conversations, harder to hold on to relationships that survived only through the persona. The irritating thing is that the person even tries to go back to being as they were before, but it's like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. It constricts, suffocates, limits. Saturation reaches this point, and the feeling is that something needs to break, and it will break. Jung said that everything that doesn't become conscious returns as destiny, and that's exactly what happens here. The mask falls before you're ready. And even without realizing it, it's this crack in the persona that opens space for the next internal movement, the one where the shadow begins to truly show itself. And with it, everything you've avoided for years begins to call your name. Even when the persona begins to crack, most try to maintain the appearance of control, but the shadow notices everything. It observes every insecure gesture, every avoided thought, every swallowed emotion, like a mirror you try to ignore, but that insists on following you through your inner corridors. And the more the soul advances in spiritual awakening, the closer this mirror gets. Carl Jung said that the shadow is not the enemy. It is merely everything you preferred not to see about yourself. The problem is that when the ego collapses, the shadow senses the door unlocking and begins to approach with a strange intensity. Irritation that arises out of nowhere, impulses that don't match the old persona, emotions you don't recognize as your own. It's as if a part of you is saying, it's time to face myself. And however uncomfortable it may seem, this is precisely what marks the transition between surviving and truly living. The shadow doesn't come to destroy, it comes to integrate. Most people are frightened by their own shadow because they've learned their whole lives that feeling sadness, anger, envy, desire, jealousy, or ambition is a sign of moral weakness. But spiritual awakening doesn't align with this naivete. The shadow knocks on the door precisely when the persona is fragile, because that's the only time it can enter without being blocked by conditioning. Sudden irritation, for example, isn't a flaw. It's a message. Mental confusion isn't a failure, it's internal reorganization. Unexpected sadness isn't a regression. It's emotional memory surfacing. An experienced mentor would tell you to observe these signs with curiosity, not judgment. When that absurd irritation appears for no reason, try stopping for 30 seconds and asking yourself, what really hurt me here? When the strange impulse to distance yourself from someone comes, ask yourself, does this person reflect a part of me that I don't want to see? The shadow observes you to know when you will finally observe it back. The more you try to escape the shadow, the closer it gets to your heels. It follows you through impulsive choices, repetitive relationships, self-sabotage, and the emotional cycles you know by heart. No matter where you go, what's inside follows. That's why those in the individuation process begin to feel this inner presence growing, as if something is trying to start a deep dialogue that can no longer be postponed. And it's curious. What you avoided the most when finally faced becomes exactly what liberates you. Because the shadow is the key to integrating everything you fragmented to survive. When you acknowledge your fears, they stop haunting you. When you accept your anger, it becomes a healthy boundary. When you face your pain, it becomes wisdom. And each step in this integration opens space for something even more powerful that is coming. Because when the shadow is recognized, the soul can finally breathe for the next stage of the journey. At some point in the journey, a person begins to carry a silent anger, not an explosion, but an internal pressure that accumulates like a storm trapped inside their chest. It's the uncomfortable feeling of always being behind, as if everyone around them has discovered a path they couldn't see. This feeling doesn't stem from failure, but from individuation calling for space, while the ego tries to compare its own time with the chaotic rhythm of the collective. Carl Jung explained that this constant comparison is a trap of the persona, which tries to measure value by external achievements, completely ignoring the soul's internal process. The person looks at the lives of others, careers, relationships, money, supposed certainties, and feels a lump in their throat as if they had missed some great opportunity. But deep down, this anger is just a reminder. You're not behind, you're just trying to live a life that was never built for your awakened spirit. This resentment grows because the world teaches that there is an ideal script, a universal timeline. Certain achievements should happen by a certain age, like an invisible manual that everyone follows without question. But those who are spiritually awakening, who feel the collapse of the ego and hear the call of the soul, simply cannot follow this script. When they try, the body protests, the shadow complains, and intuition sabotages any movement that is not aligned with the self. This is why so many feel confused, frustrated, or paralyzed. It's not incapacity, it's incompatibility. At this stage, a simple exercise is worthwhile. Write down everything you believe you should have achieved, and, next to it, sincerely ask yourself if these desires are yours, or if they were inherited from family, society, or culture. This small gesture already dismantles 80% of the anguish, because it shows that the anger does not come from a lack of progress, but from walking in the wrong direction. And when this silent anger is finally understood, it reveals its true purpose: to propel you out of the collective script and back onto the authentic path of the soul. This is where many people are surprised. The feeling of being behind doesn't mean you're falling behind, it means you're about to change tracks. This psychological discomfort arises when the soul tries to pull you onto a deeper route, while the persona insists on maintaining appearances. But once a person understands this, something changes in their posture. They begin to question patterns, reconsider choices, challenge obligations, and examine the roots of their own spiritual fatigue. And even without realizing it, this silent anger opens the door to the next inner movement, the one in which silence begins to call out loudly, asking for distance, pause, and space to reorganize everything that is about to crumble. There comes a point when the noise of the world begins to hurt from within, as if every voice, every opinion, every social obligation scratches the surface of the soul. The person used to endure everything: empty conversations, oppressive environments, other people's dramas, suffocating expectations. But now, something has changed. The body begins to reject this excess, as if developing an allergy to superficiality. Jung explained that when consciousness expands, the soul demands a cleaner, more expansive, quieter environment to continue its process. And it is precisely at this point that the involuntary retreat begins. The person finds themselves avoiding encounters, postponing responses, turning off notifications, seeking spaces where their own breath sounds more genuine. It's not shyness, it's not laziness, it's spiritual survival. It's the self pulling you away from the noise that the ego always considered normal, but which now sounds like a direct attack on your inner integrity. This gradual distancing is so subtle that at first the person even tries to resist. They force themselves to participate, to respond, to show up, because the persona still fears disappointing. But exhaustion arrives like a weight that cannot be ignored. The body softens, the mind freezes, and energy evaporates when the environment does not correspond to the state of the soul. The person realizes that they can no longer keep the conversation going, that living with someone who lives on autopilot drains their vitality, that the slightest argument can steal an entire day of energy. This is not weakness. It is a sign of refined spiritual sensitivity. To help in this process, the inner mentor invites making small changes, walking alone somewhere quiet, eliminating useless sources of information, choosing a corner of the house to be a refuge, practicing a few minutes of deep breathing upon waking. The soul does not seek total isolation, it seeks the minimum peace necessary to be able to breathe without carrying the weight of the world. And then silence begins to become an almost biological necessity. The person finds pleasure in being alone, feels their mind clearing effortlessly, feels their intuition gaining a voice, while the ego finally falls silent. It is in silence that the shadow begins to truly integrate, and it is here that individuation deepens. Jung said that no one becomes conscious without pain, but he also said that it is in withdrawal that the veil is lifted. The strange thing is that this retreat is not something planned, it simply happens. The soul pulls you inward, like someone closing the doors of a temple to begin a ritual. Friendships distance themselves, interests change, invitations cease to make sense, and the person discovers a new breath that no longer fits in dense environments. And, in this withdrawal, even without realizing it, they begin to hear an even deeper calling, the one that prepares the ground for the brutal detachment that comes before true transformation. When the soul decides to shift its frequency, everything that doesn't resonate with that vibration begins to crumble, no matter how much the ego tries to hold on. The person feels an internal rupture happening silently, as if losing parts of themselves without knowing exactly which ones. Relationships that were once okay begin to feel burdensome. Habits that once distracted now sound empty. Goals that once made sense begin to feel nauseating. It's life pulling the rug out from under the persona so that the self can finally emerge. Carl Jung said that there is no individuation without symbolic death, and that's what hurts so much. For the soul to be born whole, something within you needs to die first. The problem is that the ego never thinks it's ready for this process. Everything seems abrupt, fast, unexpected. But the soul knows what it's doing. It tears away what no longer belongs, even if you still insist on calling it my life. This detachment rarely begins with conscious choices. It begins with discomfort. A person looks at certain friendships and feels that something there no longer matches their new state of consciousness. They look at their work and realize they are exchanging hours of their life for something that doesn't nourish their soul. They look at habits, addictions, distractions, and feel a kind of silent repulsion. It's as if their own body is saying, "This is no longer you." And it is here that spiritual fatigue appears forcefully, a feeling of mourning for an identity that is being left behind. To help in this journey, a mentor would suggest creating a small ritual of detachment, writing down on a piece of paper everything that no longer resonates, that consumes you, that doesn't represent your current moment. Then burn or tear it up. It's not mysticism, it's symbolic psychology. The soul understands ritualistic language better than any word. The most painful part of this process is that detachment happens while the person is still trying to hold on to the old. They feel fear, emptiness, doubt, but at the same time perceive a strange lightness emerging, as if they were taking off a backpack they've carried their whole life without realizing it. And at this point, something very deep begins to silently organize itself: the self. This new identity doesn't emerge overnight. It's born from this harsh cleansing, this emotional pruning that seems cruel but is necessary. Jung said that the individual only finds their true center when they stop negotiating with what they already know doesn't serve them. And it is precisely here that life begins to shift its axis. The external world collapses, the internal world reorganizes itself, and without realizing it, you approach the most transformative stage of the journey, the silent rebirth of the deep self that was waiting to emerge from the chaos. After all the rupture, silence, spiritual exhaustion, and brutal detachment, a person begins to feel something different, being born from within, something that doesn't resemble who they were, nor who they pretended to be. It's as if a new force slowly rises from the inner ruins, breathing deeply after years of being suffocated by the ego. Carl Jung called this the self, the real center of the psyche, which finally finds space to exist after the persona falls and the shadow is integrated. The person feels this in the details, in the firmer responses, in the choices that finally make sense, in the conversations that no longer require effort. A profound calm appears, a calm that doesn't come from external circumstances, but from internal alignment. It's a kind of peace that is frightening because it doesn't depend on anyone. And in this new structure, the whole life begins to reorganize itself around who you really are, not the character you played to survive. The new identity doesn't arrive with fanfare, mystical revelations, or some cinematic epic moment. It arrives in silence, in small decisions, in boundaries that once seemed impossible, but now flow naturally. The person realizes they no longer need to explain themselves, beg for belonging, or justify every step. Intuition becomes sharp as a blade, guiding movements with almost disconcerting clarity. And the ego, once noisy and anxious, learns to take a back seat. This is where spiritual awakening becomes real, not as a show, but as a presence. The person begins to see themselves with brutal honesty, recognizes their patterns, embraces their shadow without dramatizing, and begins to act with an authenticity that disturbs those who still live by the persona. This new posture, firmer, deeper, more whole, is the clearest sign that individuation is taking shape. Over time, this new identity begins to radiate something different, not arrogance, not superiority, but presence. There is no more rush, less anxiety, more focus. The person feels that their choices now stem from the self, not from fear or obligation. Relationships are purified, paths open, noise dissolves. It's as if life finally responds to inner alignment with external fluidity. Jung said that when the individual finds their center, everything around them reorganizes, and that's exactly what happens. The person becomes a magnet for experiences that previously seemed impossible, simply because now they vibrate truth. And even without realizing it, this new identity, solid, silent, and profound, begins to call for a new cycle. A cycle where the soul never tires of pretending, because there is no more pretense, only existence, only truth. And it is in this rebirth that the journey awakens to the next chapter of consciousness. Ultimately, everything you've been through so far wasn't punishment, it wasn't bad luck, it wasn't disorder. It was a calling. Your whole life you tried to fit in, tried to follow the collective script, tried to preserve versions of yourself that no longer existed. But now you know, the soul only tires of pretending when it's ready to be reborn. And the question that remains is simple but brutal. What are you going to do with this awareness? Are you going back to the persona that suffocates you? Will you continue negotiating with the shadow that calls for integration? Are you going to erase the intuition that has already shown you the way? Or will you finally take responsibility for who you are becoming? Because there is no real transformation without movement. There is no individuation without courage. There is no spiritual awakening without concrete action. So, before you leave this video, look inside yourself and answer this question. What part of you needs to die today so that the self can be born tomorrow? What illusion do you still insist on carrying? What silence have you been avoiding hearing? If these questions resonated with you, then you are part of the small minority that is truly ready to live fully, not performatively, not superficially, not asleep. And if you want to continue deepening this process, if you want to understand your soul more clearly, your shadow with more maturity, and your awakening with more courage, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you're not alone. Here, every week you'll find exactly what your process is asking for.